Before we begin this episode, I wanted to acknowledge that we recorded this episode before ND Stevenson announced that he goes by the name Nate and uses the pronouns he, him. In this episode, we use the pronouns they, them to refer to ND, as that is what was known at the time. Without further ado, let's begin the show.
Hello, my name is Spencer, and in my podcast called The Dictionary, I literally read from the dictionary, but add in my personal comments and stupid jokes to make it more interesting. Episodes are family-friendly, short, and air every single day on basically every podcast platform. Come join me on this journey filled with edutainment.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the screenplays that were never written, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
My name is Daniel Kaka.
My name is Ella Cesare.
And my name is Charley Marlowe.
I love that we are getting just a little bit of extra taste of theatricality with yourself name reads. We're very proper and informational on this.
Yeah.
No, I've never been theatrical. I host a documentary series, so yeah.
Oh, okay, wait, sorry, let me do it. According to my calculations, my name is Ella Cesare.
Somehow that was even more theatrical.
Damn it.
Delighted. Charley Marlowe, briefcase.
Is that another last name? Is it Marlowe-briefcase?
No, I'm saying briefcase so they know that I'm strictly business.
Okay.
They know that you mean business.
You know he reads everything on the teleprompter, right?
For those who don't know, Charley and Ella, they are the hosts of Mystery Shack Lookback, the podcast about Gravity Falls. For a second, I forgot the name of Gravity Falls. My brain is still waking up.
Good thing we have a podcast all about it to help you remember.
And that is, of course, part of our website, pipedreampodcasts.com. So we've definitely said that name at the end of every episode of this.
We couldn't ask for a better pod home.
We've actually said, how did this not get made at the end of every episode of our show?
That's true.
Oh.
It's like we're a big old podcast family.
Aww.
But I never get to podcast with Uncle Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is our first time having the two of you on this. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
You like movies, right?
Ew.
No.
Hate them. Well, we used to like movies, and then Charley and I have agreed that we have watched too many movies, and now we can't watch movies anymore.
There's no such thing as too many movies.
This is the perfect podcast for those who hate movies, because this is about movies that don't get made. And if you're rooting for movies to not get made,
So we don't have to watch them.
Yeah.
We don't-
Well,
Exactly.
I mean,
I wish this was the case with every movie.
this one's a little different, though, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
We should probably get into it a little bit, because I know through the process of researching this, we've had to keep adding things to the notes. Dan, what are we talking about today?
so we are talking about a graphic novel called Nimona, and it was going to be turned into a movie, and then there was complications with like Disney and Fox. But more specifically, we are going to be talking about the artists of Nimona and Stevenson. Now, I kind of want to go around the room just kind of asking what's everyone's experience with either Nimona or N.D. Stevenson.
Well, I'll say I had never heard of Nimona, and it was during our emails episode when we were getting suggestions for season 4. Somebody mentioned talking about Nimona, and that was the first I'd heard of it. And then I did like a brief cursory Google search and was like, oh, this is like part of the whole Disney buying Fox, Blue Sky shutdown. And then started to hear a little bit more about it, about how some of the queer theming in it and the way Disney may not have been a fan of that, because Disney sure loves to have articles written about how queer friendly they are, but they don't like to actually put any of that in their actual movies or TV shows. I saw that and was like, oh, I am definitely interested in what's going on in this story.
It's like how oil companies will put out a post about like Earth Day or something. And it's like, do you really care?
We're cleaning up the oil that we spilled onto this bird.
It really should be illegal for any sort of oil or car company to talk about how energy conscious they are.
Drive the Lorax approved SUV.
But aside from that, I'm not familiar. Ella, how familiar are you?
With N.D. Stevenson's work as a whole, I would say mildly familiar with the Stevenson oeuvre. I am currently watching through She-Ra and the Princesses of Power with a friend of mine. We're almost done season 1, I think, and that's a great show. And he, of course, was the showrunner of that. At my school, when I attended school at SVA in New York, I helped run this club called Cartoon Allies, which was mainly focused on cartooning, but just kind of a general, like, anyone interested in animation or comics. We would have guest speakers a lot, and we managed to get Molly Ostertag, N.D. Stevenson's wife, to come do a talk about The Witch Boy, her graphic novel. So that was great. It wasn't really a one-on-one conversation, obviously. It was a group event, but that was some more degrees of separation, I suppose.
I mean, that's closer than any of us.
Yeah, and like then in preparation for this, I read about like the first 7 or 8 chapters of Nimona when it was on his Tumblr in that era of the comic, and it's great. I mean, what else can I say about it? It's a solid story, and I can see why this project was in the works for so long. Haven't read Lumberjanes, though.
And then Charlie?
Well, I've watched She-Ra, the Princesses of Power, which it's very well written, but it is, to some extent, a girl power show. At the time that it was coming out, N.D. Stevenson, who was showrunning it, was presenting as female. I remember Molly Knox Ostertag, N.D. Stevenson's wife, is a writer for Owl House, and I am friends with another Owl House writer named Charley Feldman.
In your quest to befriend all the Charlies.
And I remember that Charley, quote, retweeted a comic that N.D. Stevenson did called The Weight of Them, that was about him making the decision to go through with top surgery and how there was this pressure while running a girl power show to be a girl creator. Kind of messed with his ability to be able to see himself this way. And I remember seeing, after N.D. Stevenson started transitioning, I remember seeing a tweet from Molly that said, "Every day, my spouse teaches me a new way that I am straight, apparently." Molly wrote one of my favorite articles ever, which is about how, in Molly's opinion, after copious research, it's an extremely well-researched article, Ostertag believes that the queer themes in Lord of the Rings are intentional, and found like fan letters that Tolkien wrote to like one of the first lesbian out authors.
Okay.
Just as a fantastic article.
That's really cool. I definitely want to read that, because that's one of the things that, like, I remember first hearing people talk about the queer themes in Lord of the Rings. I feel like it was one of those conversations that started out as a joke from the people that I heard it from. And then it was like, oh, wait, no, but really, actually, this is really there.
That's how I've been with queer headcanons in general, where it's like, no, I know it sounds like I'm joking, but I'm actually serious here. So we have these degrees of Kevin Bacon from N.D. Stevenson, but neither of us actually have direct.
Because you've met N.D. Stevenson's wife, and I have friends with a co-worker of his wife.
That is correct, yes.
I feel like the queer themes, intentional or unintentional queer theming, I think is also going to go into this a little bit, because I've heard that in the same vein that The Matrix is like absolutely a trans allegory, even though the directors were not out trans at the time of making it, there's certainly a lot there, which is one of the things that I just love about art in general. There could be things where creators learn more about themselves through creating works of art.
Another thing I did in school for a gender studies class I took, the final that I did was just about The Matrix and the Wachowskis and that story, coming to the conclusion that, like, yes, there are trans narratives, but there is also specifically a closeted trans narrative that, like, creating something as an out trans person, or as like an aware trans person, a hatched egg, if you will, is a unique experience from creating as a not out trans person, or as someone who has not realized that they are trans yet, where it's like latent. And I think that's present in The Matrix for sure, and also in Nimona, because it is almost a joke, like an in-joke of, oh, ask a trans person as a kid, what superpower did you want? Everybody says shape-shifting. I'm like, yeah, I mean, that, it is obviously, it's exaggerated. It's not the universal experience, but it is like, there are posts like that, where it's like, as a kid, if you said shape-shifting was the power you want, you're trans now. Like, for context, Nimona, the character, can shapeshift.
So is the Thing trans?
Well, yeah, I mean...
Okay.
The Thing uses all pronouns.
And all people.
All people. The other thing about a closeted narrative is, like, the point was made, which was interesting, I hadn't really considered. She-Ra is such a quote-unquote girl power show, and yet as I'm watching it, knowing who N.D. Stevenson is, I see the latent gender of it all,
There are so many moments in there where, like, Ketra is like, she's going through a phase right now. And I was like, ooh, there's that moment in there. Or like, there's the moment where she's in the forest and she's like, I feel like this is all familiar to me, even though I've never been here before. And I was
That's
like, oh,
true.
Yeah, there's so many great metaphors in it.
I was even going like way more superficial where like there's an episode about the princess prom and Catra goes in a suit.
I was just going to point out that the main character's power is transforming very tall.
That is also true.
Yes, becoming bigger and the muscles grow. And...
Yeah, and obviously wearing suits also applies to like lesbians, but like I feel like having the perspective of like I'm not watching when this was first dropping, I'm watching now, and like I see both sides of it. I see how it was difficult to maintain this image of like a girl power creator, but I also see where there were areas, consciously or otherwise, not to assume someone's intentions with their art, but I feel it. I feel the vibes that come through in certain moments.
I guess it's a good time to go ahead and start diving into your notes. Let's learn about Nimona.
All right. So, N.D. Stevenson, who is formerly known as Noel Stevenson, was born December 31st, 1991 in Columbia, South Carolina.
That's where our friend Shelby is from.
Oh, nice.
Hey.
Okay.
I'd never realized that.
Stevenson was homeschooled before they attended AC Flora High School. Did they go to the same high school?
I'll ask.
I don't know why you would know that offhand. I don't even know what high school David went to.
Yeah, I don't know the name of any of my friends' high schools except for Michael.
It's
and the
the
only
same.
reason I know Michael's high school is because we went to the same one.
By their senior year, they created and illustrated a novel that won an award in the visual literacy book production category at the Richland One Visual Literacy Festival, while attending college at the Maryland Institute College of Art.
I almost went there.
Nice. In Maryland.
Oh.
Wait, where are you at now?
Philadelphia, East Coast.
Okay. All right. Nice. So, yeah, while they were at the Maryland Institute College of Art, they continued to create under their artist name Ginger Hayes, gaining popularity by drawing hipster Lord of the Rings characters, which was inspired by a family tradition to watch all of the Lord of the Rings films during the summer. From what I read, it was like a family vacation out to like their summer home is where they would spend their time to watch Lord of the Rings. So,
Well, that's nice.
I just looked up the hipster Lord of the Rings art, and I feel like I would have seen this before.
It's so cool.
This feels like the type of thing that I would have definitely seen on the internet.
Yeah, and they've put out different hipster versions of like other things as well. So I think like hipster Scooby-Doo is out there too.
Really?
It was during their junior year that they used characters that they've been dabbling with since high school named Nimona, a female shapeshifter, as part of a class assignment. From Stevenson, in a Comic Riffs interview, Nimona was originally a vague idea I had when I was in high school. When I was getting into shape-shifting characters, it was a straightforward superhero at the time. Nimona was named Nightshade, and she had an eye patch for some reason.
Well, eye patches are cool.
There was nothing really special about it, though. She came back into my head. I combined the concept with this Joan of Arc inspired character I was drawing at the time, and voila, Nimona as we know her was born.
Joan of Arc, also famous character about gender in history.
That's true.
For the look of the character, in an interview with NPR, they explained, I was kind of inspired by the fact that I never really wanted to cosplay as a lot of female characters out there. Cosplay is, dressing up in the costume of a hero, a comic character or a movie character. I wanted to dress as guys. I felt that I wanted to do a costume that people weren't interested in looking particularly buxom or sensual might want to dress as.
I love going back and looking at the words of eggs because it's a plot twist.
Which you can't explain, but you feel it like a splinter in your mind.
Yeah.
It's rewatching a series after seeing the plot twist. It's like,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, that was foreshadowed here.
Ella and I have a great deal of foreshadowing in our lives.
We do. There's definitely an inclination to read everything as foreshadowing, which I think you totally can. But there are times where I'm like, was this? Or am I reading too much into my own backstory?
So they continued on talking about Nimona and the look of the character. You know, she's stocky and she still wears pink, but still kind of butch. I just wanted to see a character I haven't necessarily seen before as the protagonist. Describing that character and then knowing that they went on to do She-Ra, I immediately went to Glimmer from She-Ra.
Yeah, the
Okay.
stockiness, it does remind me of the outrage that She-Ra was a predominantly muscular character, whereas the origins were that Mattel was jealous that He-Man was outperforming Barbie, so they made a He-Man Barbie. And so she originally has to have a Barbie's physique because that is the model, the mold.
They took the character and began a webcomic in mid-2012. At the same time, they started their internship at Boom Studios. The online comic was instantly popular and was discovered by an agent soon after posting the first few pages. Before their senior year of college, they were signed with HarperCollins to develop and publish Nimona as a graphic novel.
Ooh.
The book also doubled as a senior thesis. The graphic novel was well received and won Slate Magazine's 2012 Cartoonist Studio Prize for Best Comic of the Year, the 2016 Eisner Award for Best Graphic Album reprint, a Syllabus Award, and Cartoonist Studio Prize, a 2015 National Book Award finalist. Nimona is also a New York Times bestseller. The book has been translated into several other languages, including Chinese, Czech, Dutch, French, German, Hebrew, Hungarian, Indonesian, Italian, Norwegian, Portuguese, Romanian, Russian, Slavic, Spanish, and Turkish.
Wow.
Which did you read, Dan?
The Slavic one.
Okay.
I don't know what happened in it.
I feel like that's the way to experience it.
In the original Slavic.
Listen, I know it's a translation, but it adds to it.
Yeah,
And that's the point of a good translation.
exactly. So I'm curious, were things redone when it made the leap from webcomic to graphic novel? I'm noticing already, even though I'm only on like the first 7 chapters or so, you can track the development of the art and it gets more in-depth as he's going through school and all that. It's just getting a lot more rich in the illustrations. I almost wouldn't want it retroactively, like going back to the original chapters and bringing them up to the level of the later chapters. I feel like I would want it the original way so you can track it, because you said it was developed and published rather than just like whoop, lifted and then published as a book. Maybe they did go back, maybe they didn't, but I genuinely appreciate the idea of preserving the original art. It shows the history of that story on a meta sort of level.
From my speculation, because I know that the comic, it ended in 2016, at least like the life of the online comic is when that happened. But I imagine that there is more of a mental shift from saying this comic is something I do in my free time versus something that I'm now doing full time.
Yeah.
And you can dedicate so much more of your bandwidth to this artwork.
It's starting to be less of an episodic feel and more of a one big story.
There's moments in the comic they have put out these Christmas specials as well,
Ooh.
which feature the 2 main knights, Golden Loin and Blackheart. Like there are moments where they were young knights still in training, and they both have these like magical moments with each other where they like give each other gifts and whatnot.
Aww.
The thing is that when you're giving it out periodically, you need to satisfy your audience in that moment.
Of course.
Rather than if you're putting out a book, then you can start thinking of the overall arc of it. And I think you can really see that, especially after the first chapter. The first chapter feels like it's just one chunk moments, little by little.
Absolutely.
And then once you hit the second chapter, you're like, oh, then there's like this really overarching arc that's going on here.
And it makes me curious as to how choosing to make it a 90-minute or so 3-act film versus like a mini-series or something like that, it's an interesting choice, and I wonder how it'll translate.
Because like right in the beginning there, and I know we'll get to this soon, is that Nimona just randomly shows up in Blackheart's lab.
Yeah.
Like we have no explanation as to how she got there, what's going on. She's like, I'm going to be your minion. And he's like, I don't need one. He's like, well, I can do this.
I'm a shark.
It feels like a sketch almost.
Right.
And it doesn't feel like this is going to be a big arc.
It's like a proof of concept in a way.
Yeah.
I am looking at a comparison, and the art definitely is changed between the graphic novel and the webcomic, but it's honestly not by much. And it looks like the backgrounds for all these panels look the same. It's just like the character models just have like a little bit more detail on them. This is the original webcomic version, and this is the book version.
Okay. Changing the character models to be consistent with how they appear later definitely seems like what they... Yeah.
Okay, so we are actually going to do a full plot synopsis of Nimona. Because the way I figured it, the book's been out there. It's been out there for a while.
Yeah.
You had your chance to...
Do you want a little opening music first?
Do we have opening music? Do we need open?
Nimona. I was going to play the song that I wrote.
Let's hear it.
Nimona.
Perfect.
Yes. Perfect. Let's get into this.
Can't wait to hear it when it's finished.
Finished?
The graphic novel takes place in a modern medieval fantasy where kingdoms, knights, magic, and dragons live alongside modern science, electricity, television, and FaceTime calls.
Mm-hmm.
Nimona is a spunky...
Like Bright.
Yeah.
Exactly like Bright.
It takes place in the Bright universe.
Yeah.
I think that was implied.
Or should we say Bright takes place in the Nimona universe?
Sorry, thank you.
Nimona is a spunky girl, assumed to be in her teens. She's also a shapeshifter who insists that she be Ballister Blackheart's sidekick. Blackheart is a former knight of the institution turned villain. After an unfortunate jousting incident against his best friend, Ambrios Goldenloin, resulted Ballister in losing his arm and being outcast by the institution. Now it is his mission to take down and expose the corrupt institution under his own rules of ethics, while Nimona wants his plans to involve more violence and killing.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds amazing. Now I need to check this out. By the way, I haven't mentioned this yet. I am guesting on this podcast despite never having heard of this graphic novel.
That's what happens a lot, because I think it's really fun to be the voice of somebody who's like, oh, I've never heard of this before. That's really cool.
Because you've been that on our podcast.
Exactly.
I was a New York Renaissance Fair performer. I am wearing a Zelda t-shirt and a pirate necklace right now. This sounds like my thing.
Right, exactly. Up your alley, yeah, for sure. It's a nice breadth of perspectives because Daniel has done 100% of this research, and I have read maybe the first quarter of I don't actually know how long it is, and then Charley is
I showed up!
sweet summer child.
Ella is your guest. I'm Ella's guest.
There you go.
So, Blackheart discovers the institution is using jade root, a poisonous plant used for dark magic. To spread the word, he uses Nimona to impersonate a news anchor and exposes random villagers to non-fatal poisonous apples to induce fear. The institution denies all allegations and places the blame on Blackheart. After Blackheart and Nimona successfully rob a bank, the institution's director orders Goldenloin to kill the girl. Goldenloin goes against his orders and secretly meets with Blackheart to give him a chance to send Nimona away. But Blackheart isn't having it, and old arguments lead them to brawling with each other. At a science fair, Nimona brings Blackheart to an attempt to cheer him up. He meets Dr. Meredith Blitzmeyer, who has developed a device that is powered by anomalous energy that incidentally takes away Nimona's shape-shifting abilities. Goldenloin is given no choice but to agree to kill Nimona and capture Blackheart. During a public event, Blackheart spreads a fast-acting, non-lethal poison, causing panic, and he makes the announcement to the public that they should rise up against the corrupt institution. Goldenloin captures Blackheart as a way to lure Nimona into his trap. During the battle, while she's a dragon, she gets her head chopped off. Blackheart assumes she's dead, and her abilities allow her to live, and they escape. When they get back home, Nimona reveals her backstory, that while her village was being attacked, she saved a witch out of a hole in exchange for powers to fight back, but it was too late when she returned. Back to the present time, Blackheart and Nimona argue over trust issues, and Nimona ends up leaving Blackheart. When Blackheart learns that his poison has been causing deaths, he sneaks into a hospital to treat the victims just before he is caught. A demoted Goldenloin guards him in his cell. While together, Goldenloin admits the joust incident was no accident. He was offered a promotion if he won the joust, with an explosive javelin given to him by the director. He couldn't use the weapon against Blackheart and lost, but in desperation he used it afterwards and blew off his arm. Blackheart is brought to an underground laboratory where the director reveals their weapons developed by Jade Root and a captured Nimona, trapped in a self-repairing Jade Root chamber. They hope to take the blood sample and weaponize her abilities, but she still has control over the blood. It transforms into a dragon and escapes and wreaks havoc on the village, killing many people, including the king.
This is how we know that you're a shapeshifter. We're going to take samples of your blood, and if the blood reacts weird, that's how we know that you're a shapeshifter.
Yeah. So in a flashback, we see a younger Nimona imprisoned. It's believed that she died and was taken over by an evil spirit. So the institution experiments on her, torturing her. It's revealed that if she is split into two, the weaker half will disintegrate. Blackheart and Goldenloin escape. Blackheart warns Goldenloin that if he fights the beast, he will die, and asks him to wait until he returns with Blitzmeyer's device. They return to the lab and they find the human form of Nimona. Soon, the dragon returns. The beast kills the director and goes after Goldenloin and severely injures him. Blackheart uses the device on the dragon and kills it. Nimona is still alive and turns on Blackheart. Blackheart carries Goldenloin to safety just before the lab explodes, but Nimona is nowhere to be found. Blackheart is declared a hero, but he doesn't believe it, because he couldn't save Nimona. In the hospital, Blackheart stays by Goldenloin's side, waiting for him to awake. A doctor calls Nimona a monster, and Blackheart strongly disagrees, and the doctor leaves. The doctor then returns again, but is unaware of the previous conversation, and he realizes that it was Nimona in disguise. He runs out to see her, catches a glimpse of her before she disappears into the crowd, and is brought back into the hospital when he's informed that Goldenloin is awake. Blackheart and Blitzmeyer start a lab together. It's implied that Goldenloin and Blackheart are together. Nimona has never been seen again, but Blackheart is always suspicious with every stranger or animal that looks at him, hoping that it might be her. And that is the plot summary of Nimona.
Wow.
It's really well done. I would highly recommend reading the story if you haven't gotten a chance to.
I will.
After graduating, Stevenson returned to Boom Studios to develop and write Lumberjanes with Shannon Waters, Grace Ellis, and Gus Allen. That comic takes place at a summer camp where the campers are known as the Lumberjane Scouts. During their time there, they witness an old woman transforming into a bear, a pack of three-eyed supernatural foxes, and now they are tasked with solving many mysteries surrounding the Thisquin.
I got it. Put it in the chat. I'm doing it.
Yeah, Charlie's got it.
I've got this.
I imagine that Lumberjanes did not originate, like that word did not necessarily originate with this graphic novel, or maybe it did. But I know the first time I heard anybody refer to somebody as a Lumberjane was when I was on Mystery Shack Lookback talking about the lumber film.
I mean, Wendy would fit right in that story.
All right, Charlie.
This is directly copied from
Yes.
So the I is before the U?
Yes.
Miss Quinzella Thisquin, Penequequil Thistle Crumpets Camp for Hardcore Lady Types. And that's the Charlie Marlowe difference, folks.
This is why you should hire Charlie to help pronounce things that you can't.
As a voice actor, I'm mostly just a pronouncer.
Oh, that is not my forte at all.
I'm a professional pronouncer pirate.
Yes.
I love that that is a name in here. It's the kind of joke that works best in print, and I really hope now somebody tries to adapt that and they have to make an official pronunciation.
Yeah.
A lot of the joke here is that the Q is used all three ways. Because there is a QU in Pennaquickcool. There's a QU that does not function as a KW sound at the end of Pennaquickcool. And then there's Q by itself making the K sound in Q and Zella.
The sign kind of reminds me of the Mystery Shack, but also kind of looks like a Ouija board.
Oh, yeah, the shape of the border. Yeah.
And I like that Hardcore Lady Types is pasted over top.
So that graphic novel had won 2 Eisner Awards for Best New Series and Best Publication for Teens in 2015.
Wow. The Will and Michael Eisner Award.
And then later on in Stevenson's career, in 2015, they wrote for Marvel Comics in the Runaways issue, Doomed Youth, and the Thor issue, Thor Annual Number 1.
Wow. So they must have got snatched up pretty quick for She-Ra.
Yeah.
Because that was 2018, and all this happened like only a few years prior.
Yeah. Stevenson was also transitioning into working for animated television, and they worked on the 2nd season for Wander Over Yonder.
Ooh, that I didn't know. That's awesome. Okay, now I get it. I'm like thinking back, it's like, okay, I see it. What did they do for Wander?
I don't know. It just said part of the writing team.
Oh, okay, cool.
What I'm looking at from the Wander Over Yonder wiki says writer and background painter.
Okay, cool.
And then they made the big leap when they developed the reboot for She-Ra, The Princesses of Power.
For the honor of Grayskull!
Earlier, I spoke of how She-Ra came into existence in that the girls' toys department at Mattel was always outperforming the boys' toys because Barbie, except for one season, and they felt like, you're not allowed to outperform us. This is the only job where a women's work is more valuable. The animation studio for the original He-Man and She-Ra was Filmation, which my friend Ray, who went to animation school, tells me is well known among people who worked in animation in the 80s, that Filmation was the gayest studio in California, being the only studio that, in all honesty, this being the 70s, had low enough standards to hire queer artists.
Openly, that is.
The gayest studio, which might not have a lot of competition at that time.
Right. It's a short list.
It wasn't that they were aiming for inclusivity in hiring. It was that they were aiming for hiring.
Yeah.
So much so that they did not ask questions.
I just Googled that company right now, and it looks like one of the first things they produced in the late 50s was Popeye cartoons.
That tracks.
Now Popeye is the non-binary icon, so...
I ain't got pronouns. They all amateurs, or something like that.
What? Wait, when did that happen?
The social media manager, the PR person for the Popeye brand who runs the Popeye Twitter,
Presumably Popeye.
Okay.
is just regularly tweeting queer stuff.
In character.
Huh.
Yeah, in character as Popeye, with out-of-context moments. So there's one where Olive Oyl goes missing, and Popeye's like, I could be both a mother and a father to Sweet Pea. And then Popeye tweeted it saying, non-binary, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's pretty accepted at this point that Popeye is canonically non-binary.
Uh-huh.
Huh.
What's the big guy?
Bluto.
Yeah, Bluto and him and Olive Oyl are in a polycule.
Of course.
Wow.
That's nice. It was in 2015 that 20th Century Fox Animation acquired the rights to adapt the graphic novel Nimona into an animated feature film. Blue Sky Studios was in charge of leading the production. Blue Sky is known for Ice Age, Robots, Horton Hears a Hue, Rio, Ferdinand, Spies in Disguise, and of course, the Peanuts movie.
You forgot Epic. What about Epic?
And Epic.
Horton Hears a Who is really good.
I heard the Peanuts movie was also really good. I have to watch it.
I saw the Peanuts movie. I liked it. I really liked Horton, though.
Yeah. So I know Fox, I think they had their own animation. I think they had like 20th Century Fox animation in addition to Blue Sky. I could be totally wrong.
I mean, yeah, that's the Simpsons movie.
That's true. Yeah, you're right. It's interesting that it went to them specifically, I guess.
Was it a situation like Pixar where they were doing their own thing separate from Fox?
Yeah.
Actually, I'm looking at it right now, and it looks like the history is they formed in the 80s, they were doing commercials, and then they got picked up in 2002 by Fox, and then started produce feature films.
That sounds exactly like the history of Pixar.
Yeah.
But for Disney.
Yeah, I bet it's because the Peanuts film is incredibly stylized to look like the comic strips. Nimona has this very specific art style.
I know I just cited Epic very ironically, but tonally I can see how it does work. Blue Sky, their first non-commercial work, their first narrative work was an Oscar-winning short film from the same director of Ice Age and Robots, Chris Wedge, called Bunny, in which a widower crawls into an oven and dies.
Yay!
Fun.
I think there's definitely also something to be said with them being a smaller studio. When you're not as beholden to the corporate overlords, you have a lot more freedom to actually make a queer story be queer.
As hit or miss as the films themselves were, the work that they put into it, Ice Age 5 is Ice Age 5, but the character animation in that is incredible. The movement is great. The artistry behind it is no less impressive. And I'm just so glad that nothing happened to them.
To direct Nimona, they hired Patrick Osborne, who had actually won an Oscar the year before for his short film Feast, which was a short about a love story witnessed by a Boston Terrier who was being fed scraps under the table.
Oh, I think
About all the things you shouldn't feed a dog. I remember watching that and being like, don't, no!
David, you probably saw it because it was actually featured in theaters before Big Hero 6.
Yeah, I definitely remember watching that. There was like that and Paperman that were like kind of the start of the 2D, 3D kind of blend that we're seeing more and more.
At least in terms of Disney, I feel like other studios were probably experimenting before that. It's hard to remember exactly.
I think that's probably the first time I would have been aware of it, and probably the first time that it started to get a little bit more outside of, specific animation circles and like get to more mainstream people recognizing it.
This blending of 2D sensibilities with 3D, because for so long there was this misnomer, this idea that like, oh, the goal of computer animation is 100% realism. Anything else is a waste of time. It's like, there's so much more that you can do. Realism was never intended as the end point of the medium. It was only, okay, if we can get this technology to the point where we can replicate reality, then we'll know that we can do anything and we can experiment. And I think Spider-Verse was probably the biggest, like, now everyone is realizing that they can do this.
Yeah.
Prior to Spider-Verse, Sony was definitely the pioneer in that, because that is the look of the Hotel Transylvania and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs movies.
Yeah. Did they also produce Mitchell's vs. Machines? Because that's another one that I think of that's like got that same kind of style to it.
They sure did.
Mitchell's another one that got handed over to
Netflix.
So the Feast director, you said, was attached?
Yeah, it was the Feast director. It was Patrick Osborne. The reason why it was featured in front of Big Hero 6 is because he also worked as an animator for Big Hero 6. And that's why they threw it in front there.
Nice.
Osborne, he previously worked as an animator for Disney. He worked on Bolt and Wreck-It Ralph.
Ooh.
Had this film gone through, this would have actually been his first directing job on an animated feature, which he actually still hasn't gotten to this day.
Oh.
Yeah, he's directed other shorts. He's done Pearl, Drawn Closer.
Okay, Pearl I can see, because that was a Pixar one that also has a lot of 2D kind of sensibilities.
So the closest that he's gotten to doing a feature was he directed the animated sequence for the Billie Eilish feature Happier Than Ever, A Love Letter to Los Angeles. Now, to adapt the screenplay, they hired former DreamWorks studio executive Mark Hames, who at the time had just finished writing Kubo and the Two Strings.
Ooh.
Yeah. The film was in production, and the story seemed to be in good hands until March of 2019. This was right after Disney's acquisition of Fox was being finalized. The film's release date was then delayed from February 14th, 2020 to March 4th, 2021, and then it was delayed even further to January 14th, 2022.
There's already been a lot of work that had been done on this movie. Like, it was well into production.
Wasn't it like 70% or something?
It was 75%.
Oof.
Yeah.
But you have to understand, it was all to get the X-Men.
Yeah.
And the Simpsons.
If you want to make an X-Men Simpsons, you got to break a few
Nimona.
every other property you own.
with the impact of the pandemic, Disney announced in February 2021 that they could no longer sustain Blue Sky Studios and that they would be shutting down the branch in April.
I mean, that was the fear from the beginning of the merger, was the idea that, like, okay, Disney has Disney, obviously, and Pixar. There was a real worry that Blue Sky was superfluous and that they were going to get cut. Yeah.
Even if it did get finished, like, if you look at the stuff that Disney acquired that was released, like the X-Men movies, they were not giving the marketing at all, but also just like not given the resources needed to make it good.
Yeah.
If they did feel like going through it, they're like, okay, we got 75% finished. We'll give you 5% more and we'll release it like that.
They did release things that were ready. They did Spies in Disguise was released under Disney, technically, and that was the last thing that Blue Sky ever released. That's the one where Will Smith turns into a bird, for those of you keeping score.
This keeps happening, that Disney wants some big film property. Like, they wanted Star Wars, and then it took Monkey Island creator Ron Gilbert 6 years to even get in touch with Disney about making another Monkey Island, which is now finally confirmed. But it's just like these smaller creators that went through the studio system are just having their work disappear because of capitalist dealing. Like,
yeah,
none of this had anything to do with Andy Stevenson.
Exactly.
Andy Stevenson's film should not be delayed because of the X-Men.
For the push of the release date, it just felt like Disney was saying, we'll deal with this later.
Yeah.
And it was just them trying to say that we're going to cancel it, but we just don't want to give them the bad news now.
So you did an episode about Star Wars Detours, correct?
Yes.
Because that's one I always think about in the sense of you have acquired this property and you've acquired this other media that goes along with it. It's done. It's ready for release.
There are literally dozens of episodes finished.
It is 100% done. You stand to lose nothing by just putting it up on some streaming service. And why are you not doing it? And granted, this is a little bit different.
And I'll throw this out again. If anybody out there listening to this has those files, notgetmade@gmail.com.
Please email Mystery Shack Lookback at gmail.com as well. Please, I'm begging. I need to see this. Granted, the Nimona situation is a little different because it was only 75%, but it's like, that's still most of the thing is done. Just finish it. Like, I understand if there's projects that are like under 50% complete, you might want to maybe shop around for who can finish those if you're shutting down the studio. And granted, shouldn't have shut down the studio at all, period. But like, if you're going to do that, it doesn't make sense not to move forward.
For Nimona, the production was canceled with only 10 months left until they would have been finished. It was revealed during the controversy of Florida's Don't Say Gay bill. Former Blue Sky employees, they stated that 75% of the film was completed before it was canned. Mm-hmm. The film was going to include a scene between Blackheart and Goldenloin where they exchanged the phrase, I love you, and a kiss. Mm-hmm. The scene got a lot of pushback from the Disney leadership.
I wonder why.
Yeah. It was that giant slug.
And there was one staffer who was quoted saying, quote, it caused a weird atmosphere. The webcomics commenter Gary Tyrell criticized the decision, saying Disney could have allowed a very different kind of young heroine. Yeah. I mourn for those who would have found a vision of themselves in an animated version.
Going into the problems of massive corporate acquisitions, Disney specifically is so brand conscious to the point where they are not going to let anything slightly different for them.
That was what made Blue Sky really interesting, is that they didn't really have a house style or brand or anything like that. And granted, it resulted in these very hit or miss final products, but it was interesting. It was dynamic.
Yeah, and I feel like the closest thing we have to that right now is Sony Animation, which granted, I'm just going off of 2 movies.
Oh, I was going to say DreamWorks.
DreamWorks a little bit, yeah. The furry bait movie has a lot of 2D sensibilities in there from the trailers.
I know, like, Katzenberg, he, like, left Disney and went on to DreamWorks. But DreamWorks is, like, for the first time, where we're seeing animation that isn't dealing with the Disney-fied version of stuff, and wasn't right away, but like Shrek was the one to break so much of that mold.
Break the mold!
Still, the only reason that Shrek is the way it is because of the existence of Disney.
Yeah,
Exactly. Blue Sky exists independent of Disney entirely, or at least it used to.
My thing about DreamWorks is it was subversive at the time, but it is subversive in a way that is depending on other art.
It requires cultural context.
Yes, the joke of a DreamWorks film is that these are not Disney protagonists.
Exactly.
Versus what they're doing at Sony with Spider-Verse and Mitchell's vs. the Machines could be your first animated movie and you would still understand why it is visually interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like DreamWorks is Disney's Luigi, and Sony it gets to be Yoshi or something.
Yeah.
Where you can be your own thing apart from Mario.
Or DreamWorks is the Sonic.
Yeah, there you go.
And another thing is the way that DreamWorks changed the way the industry worked. The poster for Tangled is them making the DreamWorks face together. And so it's because of other movies and the disappearance of the G rating in response to Shrek. Other movie studios trying to be DreamWorks has led to them being more homogenized, even though they were first.
Exactly. Illumination. What? Who said that? Disney is now embroiled in all of this controversy with Florida and now this. Chapek is like, Iger, do you want to take the keys back? And Iger's like, nah, you got yourself in there. You can get yourself out. It'll be cute to watch.
I never want to root for the DeSantis administration.
No.
But it is kind of funny to see Disney like no longer being able to be its own special country inside of Florida and getting pushback on that. It's a little funny to see these two terrible forces smashing against each other.
It's like that gif of The Simpsons where they're on a boat and they're watching like two monkeys fight each other with knives. In the war of the territory of Disney World versus the state of Florida, I am on the side of Disney World, but that's only because Florida ain't got teacup rides.
Yes.
I'm not pro-corporation. I'm just firmly anti-Florida.
Florida ain't got Pirates of the Caribbean. Disney World's got Pirates of the Caribbean. I know that it wasn't even just the Nimona stuff, but that there was some internal thing from Pixar that came out that Disney like regularly goes in and censors LGBT moments or, etc.
Which really makes me wonder how Pixar's last couple of movies would have been. Onward, Luca, and Turning Red.
Luca. Come on, they were gay.
Onward having a character who briefly mentions her wife.
A cop.
Yes.
Why are they always cops?
One of the characters in Turning Red was also supposed to be outwardly queer, and it was just edited to she looks at another girl at a party, and that's as much as they do with it.
Yep. So in response, they reinserted a gay moment into Lightyear, but you're right, Charlie. They're cops too. Space Rangers are cops.
And we mentioned the Simpsons movie earlier, which has a brief gag where two cops come out of their car and they think they're about to get caught, but then they just start making out.
Yeah.
On Disney Plus, though, hey!
Blubs and Durland, of course. Gravity Falls.
Gravity Falls definitely wrote the script for Disney's gay cop trope.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I guess actually Arrested Development did the gay cop first.
Which is now a Disney show.
Oh, right.
Then that would mean are knights cops in the Nimona universe? Because then they would have been able to continue with the gay cop trope?
Yes, it would still be that trope. Granted, Blackheart left the Knights. Blackheart's not a cop.
Oh, okay.
Blackheart is an ex-cop, but he strictly plays by the rules. He is like, no, we need to not kill people. That's why he couldn't be a cop.
I did notice, because I started watching She-Ra as well, just knowing the Knights dynamic in Nimona, I started noticing a very similar dynamic between She-Ra and Catra.
Absolutely. That's what I picked out as well.
Yes.
It's the dynamic that I refer to as, oh, just kiss already.
Yeah. Something unrelated. Just before Blue Sky Studios shut down, the animators did get together and they put together a short where Scrat,
Oh my God,
who is the prehistoric squirrel from Ice Age, he finally gets his acorn.
That made me cry. I hate that I cried over Scrat. And they don't actually own Scrat anymore.
No.
There was a lawsuit about, I don't remember their name, but it's an amazing name. They sued over having originally pitched a concept to them at some point. Mm-hmm. And granted, suits like this happen a lot with successful studios where someone will allege that they came up with the idea and pitched it and then it was stolen. But apparently this one was credible enough that a judge took custody of Scrat away from Blue Sky and or Disney. There was recently a series of Scrat shorts released on Disney Plus. Chronologically, the last thing that was ever created under Blue Sky was that little animation of Scrat finally eating the nut. Yeah. Scrat finally got his nut.
Yay.
So her name is Ivy Supersonic.
Amazing.
That's it. Ivy Supersonic is now the custody owner of Scrat. And Scrat is in Ivy Supersonic's nomenclature spelled like SQART or something rather than SC.
Yeah.
It's this many levels of farewell. It's a farewell to Scrat before he goes to live with his birth mother, and it's a farewell to the studio, and it got to me. It's a good little animation.
I have bad news. Ivy Supersonic did not win.
Really?
She was offered a settlement. She turned it down. The case went to court, lost, appeal, and then a partial summary judgment from Trademark Trial and Approval Board.
But it ended the way that I had said it did. Scrat
showed up in Scrat Tales in 2022.
But that was before. I know that there's an Ivy Supersonic.
It says the absence of the character from Adventures of Buck Wild sparked rumors that Disney had lost the trademark dispute. However, the character was featured in Scrat Tales. That is no longer.
I'm going to look into this some more while you talk about something else.
So Ivy Supersonic did win a partial summary judgment, but does not wholly own Scrat.
Okay, so it's a somewhere in the middle situation. Got it.
That came out super recently, within the last month, right?
Right.
I remember seeing a lot of people talking about it and there being a lot of nostalgia for Blue Sky, which it feels like, when somebody dies, you're only going to say all the good things about them.
Well, and it's Monday morning quarterbacking. Where did they come out and support a Blue Sky when they were acquired and in danger of getting shut down?
It really seems like Blue Sky's, most of their movies are not that memorable and did not really stick around, but it feels like part of what was being mourned is they were just on the cusp of having greatness, of having the cultural moment that Spider-Verse had.
And it's the principle as well, I think, from my perspective. Yeah. Even if all they put out was, quality aside, it's what it implies for the state of capitalism and monopolies. It's that was a major other option on the menu of animated studios that has been absorbed and now destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another project that was brought up in that emails episode, a project called Mouse Guard that they were working on as well. And it looks like similar situation where it was cast, it was being animated, it was well underway.
I was going to combine the two of them, and then Nimona just came out with so much stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if more comes out about Mouse Guard, that might sustain its own episode.
We'll get into that. So this seemed like the end of Nimona. And when we had gotten the email to cover Nimona, this seemed like the end of its run. And actually, while I was doing the research, in fact, it was the day of that I started doing the research is when Netflix announced, and this is April 11th, 2022, they announced that they will be distributing the revived film and that they plan to release Nimona in 2023. The film was acquired by Annapurna Pictures, and DNEG Animation will be taking over the production of the picture. News about the production is still coming out, but as we know, Nick Bruno and Troy Quane are slated to direct. Prior to, they co-directed Spies in Disguise.
Oh, that was not a sarcastic one. I'm impressed that it's people from Blue Sky and they're continuing to do the thing. Yeah.
Wow.
It feels to me like Netflix jumped on that right in the middle of all the Disney Don't Say Gay stuff because they were like, oh, here's that thing that Disney canceled and they're also our biggest competitor in the streaming service market.
100%. I got a huge PR move vibe, especially because Netflix, I guess this was last year at this point. I hate society. The Dave Chappelle stuff.
Yeah. Ugh.
Netflix is like, okay, so this doesn't look great for us in terms of LGBT plus representation in that community.
We're not going to get rid of Dave Chappelle. Don't get me wrong. We're still going to keep all the transphobia.
What we can do is make ourselves look better relative to another studio. It felt like that was intentionally a boon to Netflix's public relations and visibility as like, hey, look, we picked this up. And then, of course, nothing happened in the past week to negatively impact the view of Netflix animation.
Yeah, as we're talking about this right now, Netflix is just totally doing fine, right?
Netflix animation especially.
Yeah, they'll be great. Don't worry. For this movie, though, they do have some casting in it that was announced. Chloe Grace Moretz is voicing Nimona.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Okay, the best incarnation of Carrie White, obviously.
They're just gonna trick me again.
Riz Ahmed is going to be Ballister Blackheart.
I like Riz Ahmed.
One of the many characters whose names I don't remember from Rogue One, A Star Wars Story.
Yeah.
Yep.
Rogue One. Rogue One? There is no Rogue One.
And then Eugene Lee Yang will portray Ambrose Goldenloin.
Ooh.
I believe he's part of the Try Guys.
He's a try guy, yeah.
Okay.
So the one piece of advice I would give is to not limit or condition your romantic feelings. Doesn't matter the gender, doesn't matter the sex. If you want to be with someone more, then you really like them. And if you don't want to let them go, then you really love them.
Oh, that was beautiful.
This part I can't confirm, and I'm not really sure if it was just like leftover from the previous production, but it is credited that Mark Hames is listed as the screenwriter. He's the one that wrote the original screenplay. I don't know if they're basing it off of his script because
That would make sense.
it would make
but
sense. But there has been nothing official to say that he is, in fact, the screenwriter of this one.
It very well could be that he had a contract that required him to be credited, and it's a completely new script.
We don't even know how much of the 75% are they using, if any.
Mm-hmm.
Are they starting from scratch? Are they starting from Scrat?
Ah!
I mean, is this even the same cast list that they had originally?
They didn't have a cast list originally.
We didn't know, yeah. There was like test footage and stuff that kind of leaked out in the wake of the cancellation, but before the Netflix thing, right?
Yeah. But other than that, a lot of it seems to be under wraps and nothing seems to have leaked out.
We got a couple of images, I think, officially.
The promo image they released for the Netflix movie, the animation looks pretty cool, but it is really bizarre to me how it's framed in just a way to not show the shaved back of Nimona's head. And it looks like just like a full head of hair.
Charlie, what you were saying earlier about like Peanuts movie shows how they can perfectly capture a style, and this is definitely not going for that.
It's certainly going for a specific style.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely looks like it's going to incorporate those 2D sensibilities, but not to the same extent, perhaps. Now, also, of course, the degree to which N.D. Stevenson himself is involved, do we really know?
So far, no.
The fact that they're making a animated series for Netflix right now, it's not like they're not going to be completely separate from it.
You're right. No, I'm just curious as to like the visual style and all that, like whose call is that, whose call is it, but it's a whole process, of course, and unfortunately it's hard to get details a lot of the time.
Yeah. So days after the announcement that Nimona was going to get greenlit, Netflix took a huge hit after its first quarter performance. It was reported that they had lost approximately 200,000 subscribers in just the US alone. And also it didn't help that when Netflix, they pulled their services out of Russia after the invasion of the Ukraine, that accounted for about 700,000 users lost as well.
Ooh.
Yeah. The reason why users have been dropping their service is because movies and TV shows that would have been featured on their streaming services years before are now finding themselves on platforms owned by the same company. So now we have like The Office on Peacock, we have Friends on HBO Max.
And Netflix's original content is garbage, in my opinion. In the last like 3 or 4 years, there's been so little they've made that I enjoy. Like, I feel like when they were first making original stuff, I mean, that's where my favorite show was, BoJack Horseman.
Mm-hmm.
The last couple of years, it's like they're doing the whole thing of we're going to cancel everything after a season or two, so that way we don't have to pay people.
Yeah.
I've always made the joke that after 2 seasons
Yep.
on Netflix, you're done. That's it. That's all you have to plan for.
Part of it is because they don't want to pay people more. And when a show goes on for longer seasons, the creators, the cast can negotiate better contracts to get paid more. I don't think this is confirmed, but one of the rumors around the cancellation of BoJack Horseman is that the animation studio was talking about unionizing.
That's a very real thing, particularly for the animated stuff. They'll release things in multiple seasons, but it's actually part of the same contract so that they didn't have to negotiate for higher pay. That happened with Cuphead. That happened with Centaur World, which is another amazing animated Netflix show about a horse. Netflix really went from this amazing PR move, did a nothing bad ever happens to Netflix. What?
So the service has over the years become increasingly more expensive. And there's some titles that viewers have been watching. They're leaving the platform. And now Netflix, like we mentioned before, is relying more and more on their original content. But now users are faced with the questions of like, is it worth shelling out $19.99 a month for a new season of Stranger Things, which may or may not happen.
Yeah.
Which has apparently a budget of $30 million per episode?
Wow.
Why are you spending that much on Stranger Things?
This is what scares me about the streaming age, is like stuff can disappear and you don't have a say in it. If only I had some kind of digital video disc with which to watch this whenever I feel like.
Please give me a physical release of BoJack. I need it. I need that on my shelf.
To combat having to increase subscription prices, Netflix is considering inserting ads into their content, which would help offset the price, which is something that they've been adamantly against since they started, and they actually prided themselves on not having ads at all.
Well, yeah, but in 2009, there was only Netflix and Hulu. Also, Hulu didn't do subscriptions at that point.
No, they didn't. It was just ads.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember those days. They've also considered limiting the account sharing so that more individuals have to get the accounts on their own.
That means we're going to go on the honor system and yes, this is dad watching. I'm winking. The listeners can't hear.
Which is just going to turn into more and more people just having that password ready to go and then just kind of jumping back and forth.
Or we pillage and plunder it, everything, me hearty show.
Something that has been reported, though, to cut back on costs, they've announced the elimination of several animated shows, which all started when Netflix let go of Phil Reinda, who was their director of creative leadership and the development for original animation, and many of his staff members.
And he was on Adventure Time and Gravity Falls.
Yeah.
I believe.
Nice.
Netflix is like, you know what the problem is? It's all this content. You need to get rid of it.
Now, I have an idea on how to help them with their budget thing. Spend less on Stranger Things.
It's literally the drill tweet. It's like, someone help me with my budget.
I saw somebody make that version, but with like Stranger Things, $360 million.
Yeah.
Somebody help me with my budget. My streaming service is starving.
So when Phil Reinda was let go, a lot of other projects were let go with that. So we have the animated adaptation of the comic Bone.
Oh.
That was supposed to be an adaptation of Roald Dahl's The Twits.
Oh.
Yeah, and then there was...
No, don't go, wait, give me a second to recover.
You're killing us.
And then there was Toil and Trouble, which was going to be headed by Lauren Foss, who's the creator of My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. As far as Nimona goes, Nimona was not on the list of the ones that are going to be canceled. Now, my suspicion is because Netflix is not directly responsible for the production of Nimona. As we mentioned before, there was 2 other productions that are in charge of it. DNEG, they're doing the animation for it, but that's under the production company of Annapurna. Netflix was simply a distributor, and that's it.
Okay.
Which means, yes, Netflix could, say, drop Nimona, but it doesn't mean that Nimona is going to stop there, and they could simply look for a different distributor.
Maybe.
Which means maybe they could get a theatrical release.
Woo! My theory was that they made it clear in posting about this whole Netflix animation debacle that Netflix Kids and Family Animation, separate department from Netflix Adult Animation. My thinking was that this is also just for shows, that Netflix Feature Animation is a different department, perhaps, that is handling this, but I could be totally wrong. But I feel like the fact is, in a metaphorical sense, they cannot afford to not do Nimona after what a major announcement it was, and the whole Disney thing as well.
Yeah.
I mean, how funny would it be if they're like, we're not doing Nimona anymore, we're gonna shop this around, and Disney's like, hey, we could sure use some good PR.
Just out of curiosity, I was like, Annapurna is producing this? Because that's like a sort of indie, more auteur filmmaker production company. And I was like, have they done any animated movies? And the only two that I see that they've co-produced are Missing Link and Sausage Party.
Oh, well, I know one of those was well received.
At the very least, Annapurna seems to be allowing somebody to just make what they want to make.
Yes.
That's the positive I see out of that. They're not going to push back on the same-sex kiss.
I don't think it reflects their philosophy. And in the same way that Real FX is another smaller animation studio, and their first two outings were Freebirds and The Book of Life, which are about as disparate as you can get. So Disney is kind of an outlier in how much of a personal stake they have in the actual content of what they produce.
There's enough of a brand that when I say a Disney movie, you picture something.
Exactly.
When I say a 20th Century Fox movie, you don't get the same picture in your head.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's Nimona. Hopefully we will see that movie in 2023. The fate of Netflix, I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, it's more of a how will this hopefully get made?
This is the first time we've talked about something on here that
how did this might get made?
like, we've definitely talked about stuff that did get made after the fact, but we knew the case, you know, like we talked about Justice League, and we knew that there was another Justice League, and there was the George Miller Justice League. There were definitely elements that went into the Justice League that everybody knows and loves today.
Yeah. Well, everybody knows it. I'm still stuck on the question of what do they have to work with? Because it would be really silly if Disney was like, sure, you can take the rights to Nimona, but we're keeping this incomplete movie. You have to remake it. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
But also has happened.
Yes, you're right.
LucasArts was working on a game called Sam & Max Freelance Police that was like 90% done when LucasArts announced, hey, we're shutting down our adventure game department and any projects currently in progress. So when the former employees left to form Telltale Games, they tried to get the source files to the game they almost finished. LucasArts said no, so they had to make an entirely new Sam & Max game from scratch after just almost finishing an entirely new Sam & Max game. So in every episode on top of their filing cabinet, there's the announced date of Freelance Police, and if you click on it, Sam says, that was a particularly gruesome case, and that is the only reference they have, unfortunately.
If it's 75% of the way complete, voice acting is one of the things that would come before a lot of that work, right?
Usually that's one of the first things production-wise that's done.
So I'm guessing that the cast list was probably the same as the Blue Sky version.
Which would line up. Like, I could see 4 years ago, Chloe Grace Moretz, Riz Ahmed, Eugene.
And a Try Guy.
That lines up to me.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't feel like necessarily casting choices that would be made, like, today.
Yeah.
Now it would be all Marvel people.
It would be Chris Pratt as Nimona.
That was something I did want to ask is, like, what is your dream casting for this?
For the dragon, I definitely want the Thing.
So I guess I'll have to think a little more on that, because Nimona, I see the spunk. I see what they're going for with the casting of Chloe Grace Moretz.
I did a little bit of research on this as well, Dan, and I saw one article post this in the headline, but then I didn't see it anywhere else. So I think it was just whoever wrote this headline throwing it out there. But a headline described Nimona as a non-binary character.
See, that's interesting as well, because I was actually thinking about, when I was reading it, that's how I was interpreting Nimona, and that's also maybe how I would cast Nimona.
Yeah.
It's a character that is created by a non-binary creator and has the sides of their hair shaved.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten to this point in She-Ra, but I know that there is a shapeshifter character who is voiced by a non-binary actor. There was a question of, like, do we really want trans people exclusively portrayed as, like, deceivers and changelings and all that sort of thing? Like, I understand the optics of it.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of thing that I'm sure ND would give blessing toward for Nimona, because it is such a personal story. And ND, you know, oversaw that in She-Ra as well.
And I saw that headline and I initially thought, oh, is that something that in the production of this movie, they decided, hey, let's fully embrace this part of the character that, you know, may have been subtext before.
That seems like the kind of thing that Disney would be uncomfortable with, so that explains that.
They could get Jim, Our Flag Means Death.
That was the first name I thought of, but I was like, that's probably just because I've been watching Our Flag Means Death.
And I don't know if that's youthful enough of a voice, necessarily.
Yeah, that's true. Vico Ortiz, I think is their name.
Ortiz.
Yeah, an actor that I was thinking that could voice Nimona was Liv Hewson. Liv Hewson is a out non-binary actor.
Nice.
You may know Liv as the daughter in Santa Clarita Diet.
I did it! Abby Hammond taking charge, kicking ass and talking to nobody. Nobody's here.
They were recently in Yellow Jackets.
They're an Australian actor, and I thought it'd be really interesting because, like, it's a fantasy world. Anything can happen. They used their original Australian accent. That might be an interesting portrayal of Nimona.
Oh,
That's true. I will say, as someone who is working in animation, the views and opinions expressed herein are the sole views of me as an individual and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of any of my potential employers.
Yes.
Perfect disclaimer voice. All of my views are, in fact, backed up by my employer, pipedreampodcast.com.
That's you, David.
Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. And thank you, Ella and Charley, for being on the podcast with us.
Well, thank you for having us.
You're welcome for being on the podcast with you.
Yeah.
It was an honor to talk about something that I found out about this past weekend. I mean, not found out about, but fully looked into within the past 48 hours.
And it was an honor to find out about it from you.
That's a reference to Gravity Falls.
It was a victory, an honor, and a destiny and a mutton.
And you know what? We talk about that a lot on a different show.
Really? Do you want to talk a little bit more about this mythical show you have?
Well, it's actually real. It's called Mystery Shack Lookback.
What?
And you can find it on the same site that you found How Did This Not Get Made on pipedreampodcast.com.
Incredible.
Oh, that's what that tab is.
Yeah, we've been going into each episode of Gravity Falls and a few pieces of expanded universe media in chronological order.
No spoilers to try to get you listeners to feel what it was like to watch the show when it was first airing, because there was a community built around it and the air dates were sparse.
We've created sort of an audio-based museum of that show and that fandom.
I'm sure and I'm hopeful that there are people listening to this who have not listened to Mystery Shack yet and were extremely entertained by the two of you and your amazing bits and energy. And so definitely go listen to Mystery Shack Lookback for more of that.
For those people, the episode I would recommend is Love God. We interviewed Michael Rianda, who directed Mitchell's vs. the Machines, a film with a canonically queer protagonist on Netflix, about the episode of Gravity Falls that
also got gay censored by Disney.
Yeah, Alex got in a fight with Disney S&P that lasted months.
And normally those fights only last like a week.
Yeah. It's a fantastic episode. We talk about the corporate oversight affecting art, specifically queer art, a lot.
Very similar to this episode of this podcast.
As a side note, I'm still proud of myself for catching the S&P joke in the episode that I did with
Yeah, in Not What He Seems.
And
Yeah.
If you want to find more episodes of this podcast, again, go to that website, pipedreampodcast.com, where you can find podcasts like Escape from Walt Disney and Come on Fahookwa Pods.
Woo!
While you're on that website, you can also check out links to our social media profiles. You can find us on Twitter at HDTNGM. You can find us on Instagram at How Did This Not Get Made? And you can send us your emails, notgetmade@gmail.com. We love hearing suggestions. This was a suggestion from a listener that turned out to be really a fantastic episode. And we also would love to hear if there are any other bits of the story that we may have missed or anything else you want to share with us. Mm-hmm. That's going to go ahead and wrap us up. So thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.
Which is the one where we say it's over?
Not this one. This one you just say thanks and bye.
Okay, well, thanks and bye.
Thanks and bye.
I am she.